Today's modern Navy, the most powerful force on the world's oceans. Its carriers provide launching pads for the U.S. Navy's F/A-18, a state-of-the-art aircraft patrolling the skies around the world. Bold aviators, like those portrayed in popular movies like Top Gun, keep America safe at home and defend our interest overseas. This is the story of one of those aviators, Rear Admiral Henry Bertram Chase, who grew up in Kilmarnock, Virginia, and from a very early age dreamed of flight.
When I came to visit his mother, said that Bert started cutting pictures of airplanes out of magazines and comic books and whatever he could find, and he put them in a scrapbook, and she saved it. So he was only 3 at the time. So I have that scrapbook. It's got all kinds of pictures in it, even one that he drew and colored himself. And then the next time he was introduced into the aviation community would have been when he was about 8 or 9, and he was on top of his garage at his home. And that would have been probably, I don't know exactly what year it would have been, but a bent wing Corsair flew over low, and the cockpit was open and the white scarf was in the wind, and he waved, and the pilot waved back. Well, he was over the moon on that one. And then again, when he was about 12, there was a fish spotter named Mr. Harper who flew out of Curl Field, which is here in Weems. It's a grass strip. And Bert went up with him. And to this day, Bert always said the one thing he remembered most was he was higher than the turkey buzzards.
Bert had 4 sons, and 2, Hank and Michael, both followed their dad into the Navy.
I can remember when we were little that he was just so crazy about airplanes that he took us out on weekends to watch the jets take off and land at Oceana at the Naval Air Station there. I recall that my favorite were the F-4 Phantoms taking off in full afterburner.
Bert was childhood friends with Carol Lee Ashburn, now president of the Kilmarnock Museum, who remembers his young friend and first-grade classmate as full of mischief.
I know in one incident, for example, we were trying to figure what we could do while we were waiting for classes to begin and people to start coming in. And a couple of our classmates were walking up the sidewalk, and we figured maybe what can we do this morning to irritate them. So one of us decided that we get the erasers for the blackboard and just put as much chalk on them as we could get on them. Open the door part the way, put them on top of the door so when they came in, they'd get erasers on them, and it would be kind of funny. So we did that, but unfortunately for us, Mr. Chase, the principal, had something to say to Bert. He came in before they came in. He got one on the head and one on the shoulder, and he wasn't really happy. And incidentally, we had you guess who cleaned erasers for a long time.
Growing up in this idyllic setting, Bert was a gifted student and athlete. After graduating from high school, he went off to college at William & Mary, but his desire to be an aviator drew him to the U.S. Navy after graduation in 1955. He flew and mastered the jets in the fleet, the swept-wing F-9 Cougar, A-4s, and A-7s. His first carrier landings were aboard straight-deck carriers, a challenge for even the most experienced pilots. As a naval aviator, Bert's talents in the cockpit were quickly recognized, and he quickly rose through the ranks and became a jet fighter pilot.
Right out of flight school, he won the Atlantic Fleet weapons competition, where they're shooting at targets at sea and with missiles and bombs, and his brand new Lieutenant JG, just a few months out of flight school, he defeated commanders and lieutenant commanders, rather extraordinary, just almost unprecedented, right? Virtually no experience in the fleet at all, just right out of flight school. So that's pretty remarkable.
In March 1957, Lieutenant Junior Grade Chase reported to the Fleet All-Weather Training Unit, Atlantic, at NAS Key West. After completion of all-weather fighter school, Lieutenant J.G. Chase reported to Fighter Squadron VF-81, flying the F-9 F-8B Cougar. It was early in Bert's naval career that the mischievous small-town boy, on one of his trips home, devised a daring feat that would become part of local legend. It was the late 1950s, and the recently opened Norris Bridge, connecting the northern neck with the Middle Peninsula, was an object of local pride. Driving to Kilmarnock from Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia Beach, Bert stopped on the bridge — there was little traffic in those days — and looked over the edge to make sure there were no wires or other obstructions.
Because he had planned to come back and fly under the bridge. And that's what he did. The next available opportunity he had, he came up and he got down low on the water, about 50 feet, and he said he could feel sort of the pressure of the water as he was coming up. And he said, you know, if you see something in the distance, it gets closer, it looks bigger. Well, he said that bridge got smaller and smaller, that little opening. So he said he went as fast as he could, which was in the F9, F8 Cougar, which would have been about 600 miles an hour, through the bridge and up. And then he flew on back home.
And was there any witnesses?
Yes, Fletcher Brown Sr. was on the bridge when he flew under it. And that's how the local legend began, with Fletcher telling the story and seeing it.
In spite of the witness, Bert's daring feat remained a secret outside of Lancaster County throughout his long and illustrious naval career. Years later, at a local event, he described in detail what had happened.
He would never tell me, and his best friend, he would never tell me, and I think he was still afraid. This was after he retired. I think he was afraid of repercussions. So at one of our annual meetings, he agreed to speak. And I told him, I said, Bert, I said, during the question and answer session, the question's going to come up, and I'm going to ask it. So after the meeting, after he got ready with that, I did ask the question. He turned around and looked and said, well, I don't guess they can do anything with me now. Yes, I did fly under the bridge. And then after I flew under the bridge, I decided to come over town and fly upside down.
Oceana is just minutes from Kilmarnock. You know, you take off in a A4, A7, you can be in airspace over in Kilmarnock, I think, in 3 minutes or less. So my grandmother would talk about Dad would come up and kind of fly mini air shows for him all the time. And my cousin Gene Talley would talk about too, my dad's first cousin. And, you know, he'd call his mother and say that he was going to come up, and she'd go stand in the yard and watch him do his wings. And he flew down, Jenny may have told you this, he flew down Main Street upside down once, which was rather remarkable. He's just a hometown boy, right? Just coming up to show off for his friends. None of which you could do today. You'd lose your wings.
In November 1957, Lieutenant J.G. Chase, while still attached to Fighter Squadron VF-81, flying the all-weather interceptor F9 F-8B Cougar, deployed to the Mediterranean with Air Task Group ATG-181 aboard attack carrier Lake Champlain. He arrived just in time to take part in the U.S. military intervention in the 1958 Beirut crisis. In those Cold War years, Bert seemed to be everywhere the action was. In 1962, with the world on the brink of nuclear war, Bert was stationed at Oceana serving as attack training officer for Skyhawk pilots. In October, the squadron deployed a detachment of Skyhawks to attack carrier Essex to serve as an alert quick reaction strike force during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fellow Officer Robert Jones met Bert early in his naval career and worked as his assistant at Oceana when Bert served as legal officer for the squadron. According to Jones, there were a lot of very sharp pilots in that squadron, and in my opinion, Bert's intellect and flying skills were at the top of the skill level of that group. That skill was recognized and awarded with call sign Fox Black, selected by his suitably impressed fellow pilots in the Greek Navy. In 1966, Bert and fellow naval officer Steve Parks took part in the Royal Navy Exchange Program. Steve remembers flying with Bert in an exercise where they dropped practice bombs on a weapons range. Bert handled the aircraft as if he had been flying it for years, Steve says. As we say in the Navy, he had a good pair of hands. But danger was never far away.
And you may have heard this story, where he landed the airplane in Scotland without the landing gear down. He was told to bail out. He refused to bail out. Landed the aircraft, said something, pretty quotable, like he's not going to waste a perfectly valuable airplane. I think, and he was ordered to refused to eject, and landed this thing and skidded out, tore up the grass, tore up the pavement.
On October 9th, 1965, while flying off the HMS Eagle east of Suez, the Buccaneer Mk-1 airplane he was flying suffered a double power loss and began to come apart during a low-level, high-speed test flight, resulting in Fox Black ejecting into the Sea of Aden, and was rescued by Sub-Lieutenant Poland of the 820 Squadron, Royal Navy.
And he was an exchange pilot, as I'm sure you know, with the Royal Navy, and home ported in Lossiemouth, Scotland, and deployed on HMS Eagle, where he broke his back. Similarly, refusing to eject because he thought refusing to eject initially because he thought the airplane could crash into the ship. So his delaying that ejection may have just made things worse for him.
He fractured his back in several places, and after making his way to Mombasa, Kenya, and then London, Bert recuperated and returned to flying the Buccaneer by January 1966. 2 tours of Vietnam followed, where Bert would need all of the skills he had acquired amid some of the fiercest combat of the war. The second deployment, in 1972, was with VA 105 and Saratoga during Operation Linebacker 1, a period of intense aerial combat during the resumption of U.S. bombing of North Vietnam.
So he had a lot of different adventures with being in the right place at the right time.
Though he was dead serious when it came to his naval duties, the mischievous boy from Kilmarnock never lost that spirit.
Dad liked to tell jokes and sometimes play little pranks. One time after we had gotten back from a 2-year assignment overseas, he was flying with the Royal Navy, Buccaneers, and several other airplanes in Lossiemouth, Scotland. And he even grew a beard, which was okay for the UK pilots, unheard of for the Navy pilots who were actively flying because you wear a mask. But he'd been gone for a couple of years and sort of made himself known when he got back by driving a car up to the front gate and telling the guard, "I want to defect," and then parking across the street and waiting. So you can imagine there was a scramble going on at Cecil Field while people figured out, what do we do? He may have been some Russian person. I don't think they knew. But that was his way of letting everybody know that he was back in the United States. And that's how he introduced himself back to the community.
Largely because of his father's influence, Michael chose naval aviation as a career.
So I was accepted into aviation officer candidate school. You may remember the story, the movie, An Officer and a Gentleman. And after finishing that 10-week training, we were commissioned ensigns in the United States Navy. And Dad did come, and he was there at the ceremony, and he pinned on my shoulder boards there. He was also there a couple years later when I had completed primary and intermediate and advanced jet training, and I was to receive my wings, the pinning ceremony. Dad and Jenny and my future bride, Deborah, were all there for that ceremony. It was great. He gave me a set of gold wings that he had received at his pinning ceremony by his mother and father. So that was very special, having those gold wings for special occasions.
My dad commissioned me in the Navy. It was in December 21st, 1979. Seems like a cold, it was a cold winter's day that he was commanding officer of USS Guam. which had completed a cruise, I think, to the Mediterranean. They were in home port in Norfolk, and this is just 4 days before Christmas. The ship was virtually empty, but I showed up and got my uniform on, and we went up to the bridge. Again, the ship was very quiet, and my dad administered the commissioning oath. His ship's yeoman was there, his first class petty officer, and immediately after ceremony, he saluted me and got my silver dollar. So I think my dad had set up to get this guy the silver dollar, but that was memorable. Memorable. And a proud day for sure.
Throughout his career, Bert had 8 commands, rising to the rank of Rear Admiral in 1985.
And I spent 20 years in my community. I was aide to a flag officer. I was later executive assistant to a flag officer. I've been in defense contracts for more than 20 years. I've been around the military a long time. And I've never, either in my Navy time or subsequent, known of an officer to have as many commands as my father had. He had 8 commands. He was commanding officer or flag commander. They don't call him commanding officer if you're a flag officer. They call you a commander. 8, just remarkable. I was a assignment officer at Bureau of Naval Personnel, and the head of Navy personnel at the time was Admiral Borda, who went on to be Chief of Naval Operations. He had only had 5 commands, so it's just remarkable, unprecedented, that the Navy would bestow the mantle of leadership, formal leadership, official responsibility, so many times. It's just I don't think it may never have ever happen again. It's just remarkable.
Rear Admiral Chase assumed command of Strike Fighter Wing Atlantic near Jacksonville. It was a pivotal moment for both Bert and the Navy, because he was the officer responsible for introducing the new FA-18 Strike Fighter to the fleet.
The airplane was wonderful. The F-18 was a fabulous airplane next to the A-4, which used to be his favorite until the F-18. But the problem with the new airplanes is they all have these electronics. And if you're in combat, you're going to lose some of those. And he was trained by World War II pilots when he started flight training. So he made them turn off some of their electronics and land the airplane by themselves, manually. And they didn't like it at first, but then they realized that if they were in a combat situation, that could be what would happen to them. So that was something that he added on to the syllabus.
At that time, there was also a reunion between father and son.
At the time, I was a flight instructor in Strike Fighter Squadron 106, the Gladiators. That was the fleet replenishment squadron that trained F-18 pilots and transition pilots from other platforms. Dad had the opportunity to go through an abbreviated upgrade syllabus so that he could fly the F-18 while he was there. And when I first heard about that, I was pretty excited, of course, to have him in the same town, but also because I was a flight instructor, so I wanted to be able to instruct him. He didn't think so, though. In fact, he told me the father is not ready for the son to teach him. So I didn't get a chance to teach him that one. But months later, after his training was complete, we had a chance to fly together before I stopped flying the Hornet or he moved on also. There was an opportunity to fly down to Naval Air Station Key West for a facility control meeting with the commanding officer there. And so we took a 2-seat Hornet and flew from Cecil Field to Key West and back. He flew in the back seat on the leg down to Key West, and I flew in the front seat. And then he flew in the front seat on the way back from Key West to Cecil Field, and I flew in the back. So the pilot in the front does all the work. It's pretty simple, really, on a cross-country flight. You talk on the radios, you manage the navigation, altitudes. You're under air traffic control pretty much the whole time. About the only thing to differentiate how we did on our flights was the landing. Naval aviators on aircraft carriers in particular scrutinized their landings with good reason because of the challenge of coming aboard aircraft carriers. The truth is that I had the better landing when we went into Key West. Of course, he's not here to corroborate that story, but you can trust me, it's true.
In June 1988, Rear Admiral Chase assumed command of Amphibious Group 1 Amphibious Forces 7th Fleet aboard his flagship Belleau Wood for operations in the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean, with additional duty as Commander Naval Special Forces 7th Fleet. In August 1990, Rear Admiral Chase returned to Washington, D.C. for his final tour as Deputy Comptroller of the Navy before retiring in May 1991. Bert's awards are too numerous to mention, but they include 2 Legion of Merit medals and 2 awards for meritorious service. He was also the 1971 recipient of the George Washington Honor Medal Award from the Freedoms Foundation at Valley Forge. Perhaps his most unique honor was being knighted by the King of Thailand.
He did a lot of exercises with the Thai Navy and had a very good bond with the Navy admiral that was there, and they did several, and you'd have to look at what it says, particular exercise that he participated in, and the support and also just the way that he did things. They were very impressed, and the Thai admiral put him in for the knighthood. And he didn't get it from the actual king because it had to be approved by the Secretary of the Navy. Had to have an endorsement on it. So there's a picture of him getting it when he's there, but he actually got the full thing when we got back to the United States here at the Pentagon.
In retirement, Bert and Jenny moved to Bert's hometown of Kilmarnock and enjoyed the simple life while renewing old friendships and flying their 1956 Cessna 172. Though he began his aviation career long before the Navy's Top Gun School was established, Bert Chase displayed all of the talents the graduates of that program possess in real life and on the silver screen.
He always flew fun. He always had fun, and he always said that, just have fun, be safe, plan what you're going to do. He really was a Top Gun, and he really was one of the most influential aviators in a low-key, non-look-at-me attitude that you'll find. That's probably one of the things I got from most of the people that flew with Bert and knew him, was that he was very unassuming. People around here, if they weren't local, didn't know he was a retired admiral, and he didn't tell anybody.
What do you think Bert's proudest career accomplishment would be?
I tell you what, that would be hard to say. It really would, because he did everything. I have his logbook, and in the very last thing when he retired, he said, and he did it all, and he did. He went to Istanbul, he went to Athens, he went to Beirut, he went to Cannes, France, Yugoslavia, Italy, Greece, Australia, Thailand, just any place that you can imagine, he was there. And he was there for a lot of the history of the world that went on, too. So.
Rear Admiral Bert Chase passed away in 2021 after a lifetime of achievement and service to his country. His life and career were shaped by a time and place, the middle of the 20th century, in Kilmarnock, Virginia, where a small boy could grow up instilled with strong values and the ability to dream of flight.